Good afternoon and welcome to this edition of Eatonbridge Partners webinar series, this time on the topic of the future of digital and enabling the CEO for growth. The plan is to explore hopefully some thought-provoking key discussion points relating to organizational agility, culture change, the risk of skills and talent gaps within boardrooms, and really wherever the conversation might take us, which we hope you enjoy. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jean-Pierre Green and I head up the Digital and Technology Leadership practice here at Eatonbridge Partners. I am delighted to be joined by three fantastic panelists who are real authorities on this subject, given their combined wealth of experience and background in the field of digital transformation. I just want to take a moment, however, in the meantime, to touch briefly on a quick market update and an update on Eatonbridge Partners. So 2021 for us was a really strong year, considering the backdrop. Revenues grew by over 35% and headcount also grew by 23%, reaching near enough 90 employees by the end of the year. And I think at last count, we're just one or two shy of the big 100 milestone, which is all very exciting. 2022 year to date has been equally successful for us as a business and exciting, with back-to-back record-breaking performances in the first 6 months. As a reminder, we are an established executive search and interim management company with specialist functional practices and expert consultants, giving us real market focus and depth across the full breadth of C-suite and corporate leadership. Our plans really are to continue to expand our international footprint, which has grown really healthily year to date, with significant activity in particular across North America, the Middle East, Europe, and Asia. We also plan to continue to increase our market share within PE, currently representing about 32% of all our placements. Continue to drive our market specialisms, so digital and technology leadership being a prime example of where we see significant growth potential. And finally, continue to build out our consulting offering, which has seen great demand and is currently going great guns. At the start of this month, we moved in some brand spanking new offices in London, which we think are stunning, and we do hope that you can come visit us there soon. And then here in Windsor, we also plan to double our floor space this summer, which is also super exciting. So I guess we're in really good shape as an organisation and feeling pretty upbeat about the year ahead, all driven by market demand, which remains very high, with organisations obviously looking to press ahead with their plans to future-proof their businesses and ensure they've got the right leaders in place to unlock potential, drive their market opportunity, and very much in line with the topic today, maximise and embrace the market shift to digital. So as a result, I guess the war for talent and the demand has probably been as competitive as we have seen it for a number of years now. So back to today's webinar, and to have 45 minutes of hopefully a lively discussion with the panel, and then follow that with a Q&A. And during registration, you did have the opportunity to submit some of your questions that you'd like to put to the panel. So thank you for that, and we do hope to cover most of those. And then obviously throughout the webinar today, there'll be an opportunity to share questions also that you'd like to put to the panel. Without further ado, we'll get going straight away and get into the thick of things. So I'm keen to put this first question to you, Sarah, which is that how would you sort of suggest the optimal sort of makeup should be of a board in the current digital era in terms of the capability that CEOs should be looking to build within their leadership teams?
I see my role as actually being there to empower the rest of the board and to make them feel equipped and confident about making great decisions about technology. It's not something you can abdicate and leave to one person, clearly. And the same goes with the leadership team. So that close working relationship between the board and the technology leadership team. So the right board actually is not necessarily one that's got technology skills, but more one that perhaps has people on it who have experience of large-scale transformation in any context, doesn't have to be technology driven, who understand what it takes to change, to understand what it makes to take a leap. A board that is very, very clear on its risk appetite and understands where it's prepared to push and where it's not. And crucially, actually, a board that has a very coherent strategy, because any technology intervention is in service of that higher order organizational strategy. So a board that's clear on its strategy has got a good makeup of various different individuals and is very clear what it's trying to achieve for its customers and why, will be the board that succeeds in driving and enabling digital transformation in a way that the board that just appoints a tech nerd and thinks the job is done won't.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you for that. And I guess, this is for all the three of you, really. I'd be interested to understand what you've seen in the context of what you've just shared, both Heath and Sarah, what you've seen work well and I guess sort of work less well in terms of some of your own personal experiences, if you're happy to reflect on some of those. So Gregory, perhaps if you'd like to sort of contribute.
Yeah, I love to rebound, on that and maybe, shift the conversation towards also the executive team, and not just the board. So maybe I should take, a couple of concrete examples, of what I've seen, of what I've been exposed, over the past few years, working with companies. Traditional media companies accelerating their digital transformation. So I would first take the example of the New York Times, which is today, acknowledged as a company having successfully achieved their digital transformation. And I think what I've seen is that at some point the company really understood that needed really to reorganize for change. And find some new leaders, adaptable and flexible leaders. So, after the executive team, sometime around, 2012, 2013, first talked about the future of journalism and how they were going to reach out to broader audiences, leveraging digital. And through digital, the company needed significant change, in leadership across the organization. Consumer behaviors changing, the competitive landscapes changing, the relationship with the major digital platforms also evolving. It was like at the point that some really vast series of complicated weather systems crashing into one another, and all of that really required some sort of responsiveness by the organization and required change, and I think there, adaptability and flexibility became really, really important. What I've seen is that, many leaders, have become leaders because they're great at one thing, but in this digital moment, the New York Times organization really recognized that they needed people who can be good at one thing, but also can learn something else at the same time. So the New York Times brought some people in from outside the Times, or sometimes also promoted people from inside who were more open-minded, and hence, these topics of, adaptability and flexibility became increasingly important as the New York Times, developed its digital strategy and transformation.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for that, Gregory. And Heath, obviously from your perspective, having been a partner at KPMG for the number of years that you were there, and obviously working across a real sort of array of organizations, big and small, and different makeups, what was your sort of perspective on what you've seen work well, work less well, in terms of how boards have set themselves up for success and the capability that perhaps CEOs have looked to build within their leadership teams?
Yeah, so I'll draw on a couple of points that Sarah said, actually, which are absolutely spot on, which is you can't just abdicate from the kind of task at hand by saying, well, I've got that person in role now, and then away you go. You've got to remain interested, and the analogy I often used is the way that boards think about finance. Yeah, you'd really rare board to find a group of individuals that kind of didn't really care about the finance of the business and just left it to the CFO. Now, obviously, there's an expert in the room, but actually, in the same way as you would with tech, you all have to be interested in it. You all have to have that that interest and that kind of understanding there. So I think where I've seen boards which do abdicate responsibility and say, hey, that's the CTO or that's the CIO's problem, sit back with their arms folded and say, show us, then that's where I've seen things go very badly wrong.
Yeah.
Where I've seen things go very well, and it does tend to be in not necessarily the kind of newer businesses, newer technology businesses, I think find that relatively straightforward. What's fascinating is when you see a business like the one that Greg just mentioned, like the New York Times, which is a really set old business with a long pedigree, when you actually see them transform by making sure they're embracing the subject, by being absolutely clear about what they're doing, by backing things at every turn, so that and holding the faith around things. I think that is what sets a journey out to be best. And when you see a business do that level of transformation, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, really interesting. Thanks, Heath. And just to pick up on what you just said, some fantastic points made. But you talked a little bit there around sort of tech, almost sort of being the responsibility of the CTO, CIO, and sort of that sort of behaviour from boards, sitting back and allowing and expecting the CIO or CTO to take a lead on that. I mean, some of the conversations we've had as a group very consistently is around this concept where you've really got to move away from this idea that digital is anything other than your business strategy. I wouldn't mind to get all of your perspectives on that. I think it's a really important point to make, because I think too often we're still in an environment where the lines are blurred far too much, and we're still talking about digital almost as a sort of tech enabled thing, rather than it being a holistic sort of business strategy, as it were. So Sarah, I don't know, you've made that point a couple of times to me in the past. I don't know if you've got anything to sort of say on that point at all.
Well, there are some hallmarks of what might be examples of good digital maturity in an organization, and what might not be, and you can start to spot them. So there are signs to look out for. What does not so good look like? There might be things like some sort of behavioral hesitancy, a poor attitude to risk generally, that then sort of plays out in how you think about technology delivery, some fuzzy strategy, some slopey shoulders and lack of clarity of accountability about who actually is driving what change and why. Maybe an organization that isn't very clear on its customer strategy and really wanting to understand what's right for its customers. That will play through, and you'd see that come through. Perhaps the most important thing, though, is the chief executive feeling very confident about how to enable and drive that digital transformation throughout the organization. What often happens is that a CEO will think, if my CFO fell over tomorrow, I'd probably be able to run finance. If my marketing director or salesperson disappeared, I'd probably be able to step in. If my CTO disappeared tomorrow, I would struggle. And that insecurity starts to play out. And actually, the most important thing that the exec and the board can do is help the chief exec feel confident about actually a technology strategy is in service of a higher order organizational strategy. That's the whole point of it. And if you're clear on your strategy, then the rest will follow. So hallmarks of where it's right is where you've got a confident chief exec who puts trust and faith in the people around them, supported by clear accountability, clarity of objectives, clear strategy, and so on. Yeah. If you've got happy staff and happy customers that are committed, who can articulate to you what you're doing and why, that's a sign actually of digital maturity. Yeah. And if people can't tell you why that a shift is being made, then you know that something is wrong. And in an organization where there's a relentless focus on why are we doing this, what are the benefits, what are we driving for, how do we test this particular change compared to another, how can we really validate that this is worth going after? That focus on goals and objectives is absolutely key there as well.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah.
And I just pick up on a point on there, actually.
Please do, yeah.
I think it's a really important one, is that being able to tangibly measure the outcome. So if you be very clear about what outcome you're expecting, but also being able to measure it to say when you actually achieved success. I think that's really key. Because a lot of people, a lot of transformations set off on a journey and often think they've actually achieved what they set out to do, but actually haven't, or have got so close, but not actually extracted the real value over what they're doing because they haven't done, a final key piece. So I think that that clarity of goals, Sarah, I think is really, really important.
Thank you. Go on, Gregory, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I love to pick up on something, that I think is really important. Also, it's a willingness, from executive teams, but also some boards, to the willingness to learn, and to learn from the very best. I can take an example, a very interesting example, from a company that I mean, is today widely recognized as, you know, one of the traditional media companies having expertly, you know, navigated the digital transformation. It's a German company called Axel Springer, I mean, I'm going to give you an anecdote. I think it was probably around, you know, 2012 or 2013, and the CEO at the time, who is still the same CEO, Matthias, I mean, a visionary CEO called Matthias Dopfner. He became very intrigued with by the Silicon Valley, very aware that the region has a very strong reputation for developing high-performing and high-functioning international organizations, and he really wanted to learn more. And so he asked at the time 3 of his top managers, his top execs, you know, part of his executive team, to visit the region on 9 months, not 3 or 4 months, 9 months fact-finding mission.
Yeah.
And during this time, you know, each of the 3 managers were totally exempt, you know, from their day-to-day responsibilities. Their only tasks were to build relationships, you know, and to learn, you know, from thought leaders, you know, in the Silicon Valley, learn from the best in the region, and the eventual goal being to then, you know, I mean, not just learn, but instill, you know, some digital culture within the organization.
Thank you, Gregory. And obviously, I'm interested because we touch a lot on how you know, sort of digital and business should be converging and morphing into the same. And you know, we're still referring to digital transformation. We're still referring to digital strategies. I wondered to what extent and what your views are on sort of you know, what needs to happen really for us to get to a point where we're really just referring to strategies and transformation and talking holistically around a business. I mean, my assumption, Gregory, is you're working for a relatively mature digital organization, you would hope and think, you know, Google, YouTube. You know, do you still refer to digital strategy, or are you just really talking about strategy within your environment?
No, I mean, yes, to your point, I mean, we are a pure digital player, but what's very interesting, at least, you know, in the different roles that I've had, that I have the pleasure to hold, is that we are working a lot with a number of companies and a number of organizations that we are really trying to push into the future and helping them, you know, use digital to transform their business. So hence, you know, the few examples that I mentioned, you know, around the New York Times or Axel Springer, you know, I mean, all these anecdotes, you know, that I just mentioned, you know, are really the result of the relationships built in my Google career.
Yeah.
So we are extremely involved, you know, in, you know, building partnerships, you know, with companies so that they can make the most of the digital transformation.
Yeah, indeed. And Sarah, in your capacity, obviously being a chair and a NED on several boards, you know, what's your perspective on this in terms of what needs to shift, or, you know, how the gap can be made up as far as that sort of maturity curve and moving boards and organizations towards, you know, I guess sort of being you know, digital being the essence of their business rather than something they still refer to as almost a separate strategy.
Yeah, well, rigorous focus on what your strategic objectives are creates that pull through of focus on then how do you achieve it, and technology may or may not be part of the answer, and your people and your processes and the way in which you engage with your customers will all together with technology be the answer. Too often organizations say, let's go and do a tech project. We in one of my organizations, when we kicked off a big transformation program, walked around the whole time saying, this is not an IT project. That's not what this is. This is actually how we are going to deliver our strategic goals as an organization. So that real focus on what you're trying to achieve is so important for the boards. You can also borrow quite a lot from agile methodology and bring it into the boardroom and not be scared to do that. The simple process of show and tell, the simple process of actually meaningfully having a short retrospective look back on how a particular piece of development, for example, has gone, and then engaging the board in feedback on that is a way of really bringing the board close to what you're actually trying to do. Bringing the customer's voice into the room and staff voice as well will be a way of keeping it very, very honest. You know that you can avoid the sort of rosy, tone-deaf comms that can get broadcast from head office out to organizations. You can cut through that if in the boardroom you insist on having people from all parts of the organization come talk to you meaningfully and honestly about what they're seeing and why and what's working and what's not. And these are all ways in which you bridge the gap.
Yeah, and you talk there about agile thinking. So, Keith, you might want to comment on this, but in terms of that sort of, and we'll go on to talk about broader sort of cultural change in a second. But in terms of that culture and mindset within the boardroom, which is obviously where it all needs to start and is fundamental, I think. What's the view on what the CEO needs around them across the sort of the exec and non-exec table from a mindset and culture standpoint to ensure that digital transformation is set up for success? Have you got a view on that, Heath?
Yeah, so common goal is something that I think is really, really key. I've seen that in a number of organizations. We saw it when the pandemic first happened, and we saw businesses transform from, going into the office every day to, doing stuff on Zoom. And so that was a common goal, wasn't it? It was a common goal that we all got behind, because if you didn't do that, then, you couldn't function. And the level of transformation we saw in a very, very short period of time was just part of what we did. It's kind of the new way of working. I think back to the kind of the internal workings of KPMG. I was the business sponsor for KPMG's digital workplace, and we had a timeline that stretched from January through to December of 2020. It was done in 4 days. So that commonality of goal, I think, is really, really important. I think and it's not just digital projects either. I think that's for all transformation projects. I spent some time again in the early part of the pandemic. I led the technology work stream for one of the Nightingale hospitals, and we can argue about the politics of whether they were a good idea or not. But to actually see a common goal where everyone knew that within 34 days we were going to be accepting patients into this, what is currently a showground. That commonly, every single person you spoke to that was involved knew about what they were doing and what the goal was. So
obviously the pandemic was clearly a catalyst for a lot of very rapid change and transformation.
So the point is how do you actually recreate that? How can you recreate it with if you think about the mindsets, if you look at the human behaviors that happened during the early stages of the pandemic, the can do, the must do, as I said, the commonality of goal. If we can recreate that as we do our transformation projects, and that's absolutely key.
Yeah. And Sarah, as you're advising boards, what are you telling them about, how you recreate that and the mindsets and the culture that you would want to see built around those board tables?
So I want to build on what Heath was saying on that, JP, because it's a really, really interesting point. So not only how do we recreate those halcyon days where actually a tech team was told to just get it done and everybody celebrated them as being heroes, actually there are two challenges now that emerge from that. One, how do we stop organizations snapping back to the old behavior? It's like elastic, and I'm seeing it wherever I look at the moment. And then how do we then have the right culture to deal with new world? I'll just give a couple of examples. So one organization that I work with, very, very large, 10 million turnover sort of business, a large technology team that was always second-class citizen and bottom of the heap and felt it, suddenly became heroes with capes throughout the pandemic because of what they were able to do. And had the foresight to say to the board at that time, please don't let this change. You've seen what we can do. Trust us. Let us do this again. And already within, I mean, it didn't take very long at all. The board has snapped back to that old way of being, which is just such a shame. Another organization that I work with had some very exciting moments of taking real risks, ripping the plaster off and going live with some unproven technology because they felt it would give a competitive edge. My goodness, it did. It was a risk that was worth taking. But even now they're on a complete overhaul of a part of their logistics chain, which has got such potential in a home delivery context now to be in a completely different world post-pandemic, but they've fallen back into sort of waterfall, step-by-step, careful delivery without focusing on what really matters. So snapping back is problem number one, recognizing you're in a new world and you need, if you hadn't even got there before the pandemic and then you found yourself going into a different world during the pandemic, my goodness, we're in a third era now, aren't we? Recognizing that and understanding it and changing your customer strategy to adapt to that is key. So again, another example, an organization I'm working with, we now see such competition online around kind of SEO and cost of acquisition for our customers to be able to try and acquire customers online, that we've now, it's so expensive and prohibitive, we've actually had to completely pivot and change our approach. And everything is about doubling down on using technology to do some very cool things around retention, because actually we're not going to be able to play to win as an organization of our size in that particular space. So recognizing what the new world brings and having a board that has got that agility of mindset that they can shift and take what was great from the pandemic and build it into a new world is key for the success of every organization I work with at the moment.
And any of you got the sort of silver bullet in terms of how you address the problem of that elastic band?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've got that, but I'm not going to share it. There's not a silver bullet to this stuff, right? I mean, there really isn't. But and a lot of the things that you see that you've used in general transformation, you know, we've all talked about openness of mind and openness of thought. I think that's absolutely key. If there was going to be a silver bullet, then I guess it would be that. You know, what is the openness and what is the ability to embrace things. It's a really interesting one that I guess we just touched on, is that I think, Sarah, you said about bringing agile into the boardroom. I think absolutely spot on, right? Who would ever start a transformation journey now and say, do you know what, let's not be agile about this. Let's not do that, right? And I think that sounds crazy even saying that, right? So yeah, let's make sure that we're I guess being as open, as embracing of the new ways of thinking, you know, as we go through our journeys.
And Gregory, you're very much in that sort of space. So any sort of perspective from you?
Yeah, I would also add, you know, the willingness to build a culture where you are breaking silos. Very, very important. So, I mean, I can take the example of the New York Times again. So they had a model that was originally based on a version of the traditional Times company, very silo-based, different disciplines, etc., etc. And a traditional project would involve people from very different disciplines coming together to try and solve the problem, but they, at the end of the day, they would always keep one eye to their own discipline.
Of course.
And I mean, no need to mention that in some cases, you know, vertical politics often got in the way of rapid change. And so the New York Times moved to a matrix structure. So we're talking more here about, you know, organization, but it all goes with, you know, this willingness to break silos. So they moved to a matrix structure where the team leaders, the new team leaders, you know, often young, very young, have power over the product and the tech roadmaps and can make decisions based on what they learn from the testing and learning platforms without real regard to senior leadership. And they did it, they do it, and I mean, they started to do it very, very quickly without a control group, because they thought organizing the control would be too long and, more importantly, too complicated. And they would rather just do it and measure its success or failure with the view that they can always reverse it. So flexibility and also change in terms of organization with the goal of breaking silos as much as possible.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I'm quite keen to sort of move the conversation along then to cultural change more broadly. We've talked a little bit about culture within the boardroom, but this sort of concept of, and we hear it a lot said, cultural change as a key enabler of digital transformation. You know, what is it that we're actually saying? Heath, would you like to kick off that?
And cultural change. I mean, I'm not an expert to talk about that. There's plenty of people that are, but certainly my view of that is that actually, if you think about what enables change, there's really only a couple of things. The first one is that there's got to be an absolute desire that where you are now isn't good, right? And you've got to be an absolute desire that you need to move to another place. So it's not comfortable. It's not comfortable where you are. So there's a need to move to something else. I think the next thing you really need is, well, what is the first step on that journey? You know, what is the roadmap to therefore move to something else? And I think if you have those things through the clarity of your leadership, through the clarity of engagement from the board, the clarity of communications to a business that says, we're moving from there to there because that isn't tenable, and here are the steps on the journey we're going to take, then people understand. You know, when people turn up to work, whether that's into the office or onto their day in front of a laptop, they need to understand, well, what is it that I do need to do different? You know, what is that first step on the journey that means I'm going to make that change? Yeah. And for me, that's been the case for cultural change in organizations, ever since I've been at work, right? Yeah. So actually adapting that to the digital world is no different.
And do you agree, Sarah, that cultural change is a key enabler to digital transformation or transformation more broadly? And what's your view on that?
It is how you deliver transformation. You could have the best technology in the world, and if you don't have the accompanying culture change, you might as well not bother. You're throwing money away. And why is that? That's because people bring about change, not technology. Mm-hmm. And the moment an organization really gets clear on that, it can start to make the kind of impact that Heath was describing. And there are really interesting ways of where you know perhaps that you are driving that culture change. And I'll just pick out a couple of examples that for me bring it to life. Mm-hmm. It's simple things like if it's an internal efficiency program, for example, people rip up their cherished spreadsheets and start using whatever the new tools are that are put in place. Yeah, and if they're not ripping up those spreadsheets and there's no manual hand cranked ways of doing things, then you haven't delivered it. It's where, for example, and I'll have to name the organization because it will sound odd otherwise.
Just between the four of us.
Just between us, the National Trust, where I worked for a long time, culture change is when a member of the board makes a surprise visit to a remote lighthouse in the northeast of England and asks that lighthouse operator, that's why I had to say it was the National Trust, you'd wonder where I had come across lighthouse operators, asks a lighthouse operator what they're up to, and unprompted and without knowing who they were talking to, that lighthouse operator was able to articulate a tens of millions of pounds investment in a digital transformation and why that would make a difference to that person every day doing their job and how it would make a difference to how their customers interacted with the lighthouse. That's culture change in action. That's know when you're getting there. It probably the biggest example, the best way to really know if you're getting there is, do you have an organization that with real intellectual curiosity can start to ask the questions that no one has ever asked before? What are those unspoken questions that you haven't even thought to ask? And given that I referenced the National Trust, I'll just give you an example there. We're obsessed legitimately with understanding who our visitors were, where they were coming from, where are our customers, how long do they travel to get to a National Trust property around the country, how long do they stay, do they go and spend in the shop, do they go and spend in the cafe? These are good, legitimate, important questions that if you're running the National Trust, you need to understand. Mm-hmm. But something magical happened on the other side of transformation, where somebody was able to say, well, we know who is visiting and who our customers are. What are people who aren't our customers? Who do we have who are is in fit, should be a National Trust customer, lives near us, works near us, whatever, and yet isn't visiting. And we know from our profiling that they should be. They're the people to target. So from going with obsessing with understanding the characteristics of who our customers were, we suddenly asked who aren't our customers. And it triggered a completely different conversation. So you know when that culture change is cutting through, where you have when your people start to ask the unaskable questions from before.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you.
I'd like to add something to there. Actually, I think something I have seen in organisations and in the boardroom right the way through organisations is that clinging on to things they think are known facts. Yeah, so it's almost like a crutch. I know that this must be true, and I'm thinking about a large. I'm just being really careful not to try and mention it. A large manufacturing organisation, where they assumed, because of the work they did and the products they sold, that they couldn't adopt cloud technology. Conversation closed, right? So right the way through the organization, no, we can't adopt cloud technology, that's a madness, right? I mean, the CIA and secure parts of the UK government use cloud technology all the time. So, but it was that crutch they always went to. So if you can find what they are, find those things that people cling to say, well, I can't change because of X, and debunk that myth, then I think that's a really, really important part to change as well.
Yeah. Okay. And if we're in agreement then that people lead transformation, and not technology, not even data, it's all really sort of people, and therefore the sort of cultural transformation agenda. What insight can you all share from your own experiences in terms of how to get that right, and what would be the sort of the blueprint, I guess, without sort of giving away your IP, as to how you execute that in the most successful way. I don't know if anyone would like to chip in.
I'll kick off, if you like, with engage, and when you think you've engaged enough, then engage a little bit more. Who hasn't been on a project, whatever type of project it is, where the kind of communications channel or communications work stream has been a bit of an afterthought. That needs to be fundamental. That level of engagement, so that, to go to Sarah's example of, the most outlying member of an organization understands the journey and understands where they're going. So that engagement would be my starter.
Thanks, Heath.
I'll build on that if I may. Sorry, Gregory, but just
no, go ahead. What
to Heath just said. A former colleague once said to me, why would we not treat our internal comm strategy in the same way as we would our customer strategy? So when we think about our customers, we think we have lots of different cohorts, lots of different need states, lots of different user groups, lots of different stages of the customer journey, different preference types, different ways of ingesting data, different ways of wanting to be able to engage with us, whether it's social media or in person or whatever it is. And actually, why would we not think like that with our staff? Actually, our people are our best tool here to drive whatever transformation we're trying to do. Some of them will be the sorts of people who will like to receive long documents and understand it that way, and others will want a quick video, and others will just want to be experiential learners and just get amongst it and learn it and play with whatever the new capability is. All will have different needs at different points, and thinking about them with the same subtlety and nuance that one would one's own customer base is a great way to deliver the kind of engagement that he was describing.
Thank you, Gregory. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm looking at, if we are looking at, the media companies, traditional media companies that have been successful, driving digital transformation, I would probably highlight, 3 success factors. Mm-hmm. So the first one is not to fear self-cannibalization from your traditional platforms to digital. I mean, print, analog to digital. I think this is absolutely key, and obviously, this mindset, this spirit needs to come from the top. The second that we touched on a bit is to accept diverse and entrepreneurial personalities, within your organization. And the third one that we discussed a bit is not allowing the creation of silos within the company. I think if I'm looking at the successful companies, in the space, the ones that completely transform their models, you can really see these three success factors panning out.
Yeah, very well. And if we're all sat here saying that, if we consider transformation being straddling people, process, and technology, and people being the key part of that equation, is it your view then that is being adopted and working well across the organizations that you've had contact with and working for? From where I'm sat, certainly, I don't see that as being as prevalent as it should be, and still too many organizations perhaps not approaching their transformation and change agenda through the right lens, and still not recognizing it as a sort of people-led effort, and not investing enough, I guess, in that sort of cultural change and transformation agenda that we talk about. So what is the challenge? Sarah, perhaps if I can come to you, as a NED on several organizations, are all the businesses you work for getting it right, and if not, what is the challenge?
Yeah, all perfect. So it's really interesting. The perfect preconditions for successful transformation is the perfect company, and of course the perfect company doesn't exist. And what I find fascinating is that every organisation I work with, their attempts at transformation hold up a mirror to all that was wrong and right about the organisation before they started. So you start to see the weaknesses and strengths exposed. And writ large. So actually the organization that's really, really clear on where it's strong or weak is where they're going to get it right or wrong. One of the organizations I work with has got one of the most impressive, competent executive teams I have ever come across. Very sensible, healthy risk appetite, very, very well joined up executive team that work really well together, but they're highly analytical, very reflective, very structured and methodical and disciplined. And so they've approached their big transformation program with a very methodical 3-year structured roadmap and so on. And of course, it's founded on the first couple of boulders that have come along, because actually, monolithic programs are increasingly, not the way to achieve things, and they're now having to sort of completely disaggregate and break it up and put it into bite-sized chunks. And that was their DNA that came out through the way that they were approaching that program. Got another organization going through a similar sort of pan-organizational transformation that they're trying to deliver. And their Achilles heel is silos, which Gregory's been talking to, the problem of silos, lack of clarity of accountability, some tanks being parked on lawns, really tricky interaction between the execs. So even though there's a shared view of what the customer case is and what they're trying to achieve, actually they keep on falling over one another, or worse still, at times becoming quite mutinous in program boards. When something's going wrong when in a program board for some sort of big transformation program, where the only person doing the talking is the program director and all the execs have gone quiet. and that again is a sort of it was already a pre-existing problem. So actually what the board needs to do with executive teams is say, here's where you're brilliant, and here's the extent to which where that's going to be relevant in driving for this new strategic plan that we've got, or where actually, despite being brilliant there, don't fall back on where you're really good. There might be another way of doing things. Equally, here's where you're weak, and here's what the impact of that will be. Here's where that will stop us being able to deliver our benefits. That's what will stop us delivering on our organizational goals. And a board that can have that kind of honest dialogue with its executive team will be the board that's really helping, rather than sort of nodding from the sidelines and saying, do your best, it's hard, isn't it?
Indeed. And Heath, do you have a perspective or anything to add, I guess in particular around if it's so obvious and straightforward for us, what's been your experience, I guess, of where people have found it more of a challenge?
Yeah, I mean, nothing's ever obvious and straightforward, is it?
On paper it is.
Yeah, well, yeah, obviously, yeah. So I think, I think the real stopping points for programs and success can be often masked and hidden by other things. So I think we've all talked about openness and clarity. I think there is something for me as well around getting a business fit for transformation as well. So even if you're not actually embarking on a journey, right now, I can't really think there's many people that aren't, but if you aren't actually in the midst of a program, there's things that you can do to get your business fit for change anyway, so that everything doesn't come as a shock. We talked about the pandemic because that was a great leveler. There were businesses that literally could not pivot, that couldn't change because of decisions that had been made, in the past, or that things that just hadn't been done or hadn't been put in place. So I think for me, it's about finding those absolute blockers and just being really honest about them and saying, okay, well, what do I do to make that change? If you don't have that honesty, if you don't have that openness to say, look, we understand where we're at and we understand now what we need to do, then it's really difficult to make a change.
Excellent. Thank you. Very good. Well, listen, that's been really interesting. Thank you very much. I'm mindful we've had quite a number of questions come through from the audience, so wouldn't mind taking the opportunity to put some of those to to yourself, if that's okay. Many, in fact, we've already, I think, sort of covered and touched on, but there's a few here that I think we can explore. So one question that's come through is around how do you sort of measure the success of your digital transformation? I wondered if anyone had any insight. Happy to hear from any of you really on that particular question.
I'll happily go. I don't accept in any of my boards that you can't measure it. I do accept that it's not going to be a perfect measure, and you shouldn't slavishly follow some fictitious number that everybody knows is meaningless in pursuit of benefit measurement. But if you aren't really clear on what it is you're trying to deliver, how can you test decisions along the way as to their relative merits or not? So you can put a number to it. When you work out what you want to achieve right at the beginning, ask yourself, what's my baseline today? How will I know if I'm getting there? And I always apply can I look myself in the mirror in 3 years' time or 6 months' time or whatever it is? Can I look myself in the mirror and say, yeah, I think we can have reasonable confidence that we got there? Spot checks, sample surveys, small anecdotes, little pieces of data that necessarily and explicitly assumption-based and not perfect world data, that sort of mindset of, look, we just want to be able to give ourselves some assurance that what we're doing is on the right track and know to pivot in a different direction if it's not. Ask yourself in advance what that basket of measures might be, however imperfect they might be comfortable with imperfect variable numbers, but then use them and use them meaningfully.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Any other comments?
Yeah, just to add to that one, I think having a well thought out kind of net promoter score, I think, is really important. So one of the obvious ones is that if you are doing a digital transformation, are people using the new method? Are people using the new way? To Sarah's point about ripping up your spreadsheets, is that happening? And actually, are people promoting the new way? Are people talking about the new way? So having that, I think the use of net promoter, I think, is really, really important. I think it is important to have a financial measure as well, to make sure that benefits are truly realized. So if you are genuinely transforming from a legacy to a digital world, then have you turned things off? Have you actually realized some cost savings by getting rid of the old? So I think some financial measure around things are really, really important too.
Yeah. To your point, I mean, in the business, I mean, in general, the ways we measure progress is by, checking, the percentage of revenue coming from digital and digital channels, and measuring the progress. I mean, moving from legacy platforms to new digital platforms. So that's an efficient and really clear way to measure progress.
Very good. Thank you all. I think we've probably got time for one more question, so I've got to pick carefully because we've got a few. But what one's come through, which I was quite intrigued by, which is that digital transformation, or any transformation, obviously can be quite, for any organisation, intimidating. It tends to be fairly sort of big, hairy, scary, and complex. Any advice or thoughts on how you could potentially simplify that journey or simplify that process?
I mean, for me, it's very much around clarity. So just being really, really clear. Yes, you can overcomplicate, lots of things, but actually being really clear of an outcome that you're trying to achieve. And I think when you have that clarity, you can actually, in many ways, boil away a lot of the complexity in the message. You can't disregard it, right? Because technology is a complex beast, right? But I think having that clarity of message of this is where we're going, and this is what we expect, and this is what we, this is the direction we're moving in.
Clarity, shared vision, alignment. Yeah, these are absolutely critical, aspects and success factors.
Thank you.
I'm breaking things down into bite-sized chunks. So be clear on your end state and your end vision, but don't confuse that and conflate it with the need to map out every single step that you're going to take along the way, because you don't know and you can't know. Don't confuse putting in place foundational measures with some sort of test and learn agility alongside it. Don't wait for a perfect world before you move forward. Break it down, have small go, no go criteria, celebrate tiny successes, build on that.
Excellent, thank you. And I'm going to squeeze in one last question, in fact, to put you all on the spot. But Michael has contributed to live, in fact, so I thought I'd give him the stage, as it were. So he sort of comments that obviously there's some great examples that we're referring to in our discussion today, a lot of which applies to probably the sort of commercial private sector. He was curious to understand what your sort of comments would be on, or your thoughts on the approach that maybe the public sector or government bodies might be taking at the moment in this context. I don't know if Heath, you perhaps had some experience, I'm sure. Sarah, you look like you were going to say something. So any thoughts on that at all?
So I'll go first. So just quickly, yeah, I worked with probably one of the largest government department in a digital transformation that they have been on and are still on. And it's quite funny because I spent most of my career actually in the private sector. The department had a new DG in place that had actually come from the commercial world, and actually their desire was to get engagement from people who had experience outside of the government sector. And I saw a dramatic change, in people and attitudes by adopting a lot of the things that we've talked about. But one of the really clear things that they did was map out the user journey and map out a number of user journeys, and actually taking the emphasis to be the change of the user journey rather than the change of a system or to a new technology. And is how do they adapt that user journey to be better and clearer? And I saw a massive shift in user engagement and a truly successful project, which, as a taxpayer, filled me with warmth.
Thank you. And Sarah, sorry.
I would say harness what's different about being in the third sector or charity or government and make the most of it, because there are advantages. Often there's some sort of purpose that drives you. You're there in service. That's a very helpful galvanizer, actually, that commercial organisations don't always have. Often you might have some very stringent regulation or frameworks or controls or go no go areas. Actually, it's helpful to have those parameters that sets the scene of where you can play and where you can't if you're in a third sector organisation. And again, commercial organisations don't always have that. So otherwise, I would say it should be no different. There's always a business case. There's always something to be proven. There's always something to be improved. You're always going to need to engage with your end users, and you're always going to need to engage with your staff. So I sit across boards in every sphere, and I don't accept that the challenges are any different. I see the same things. It's about leadership, clarity of vision, strong execution, and all the same factors apply.
Excellent, thank you. And Gregory, you can have the last word if you'd like it.
I would say that I think the best mindset you can have, as we continue to evolve, is to be always aware that there's a need to continue to change aggressively, okay, and continue to establish, consistent entrepreneurial learning mechanisms. It's really, really crucial to future success. Mm-hmm. And if you want to stay atop of your market, you need to stay at the forefront of innovation. and you always have to continue to change aggressively and to put yourself, I mean, your company into question all the time, because, you know, this, I mean, it's not because you are successful today that, I mean, you will continue to be successful if you don't continue to change.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Well, listen, that brings us to a conclusion and the end of our journey together this lunchtime. So, you know, thank you so much indeed for, I think, what's been a really fascinating conversation. I just want to take a moment to thank, obviously, our three panelists and the time they've invested and their contribution to the conversation. I'm sure if everyone wasn't on mute, we'd hear roaring applause at this stage. But I know that you're more than welcome, I'm sure, to receive any follow-up queries that might come through from the audience. There's a number of questions we didn't get time to cover, and we'd be more than happy to connect anyone within the audience to the three panelists for any sort of follow-up conversations as appropriate. And listen, I mean, we've had about just over 200, I think, CXOs within our network sort of log in this lunchtime to listen in. So thank you very much for the interest. We are going to be sending out a survey immediately after this, which we'd encourage and welcome feedback on, of course. And we'll leave it at that then for today. And once again, thank you, Heath, Sarah, and Gregory for joining this webinar this afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.